Jen Psaki, who was Biden's press secretary, is now an MSNBC host, is sitting there nodding along, and then she just moves on. And I'm like, ma'am, you're a journalist, you're a cable news host, and you're not going to object to somebody saying the federal government should regulate cable news? You really don't think that that's going to bite you in the butt just a few years down the line when another side takes power? Really?
Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox, this is Brad Polumbo, and you're watching the Base Politics Podcast. This week, AOC declares war on the free press, Biden declares war on meritocracy, and a very bad Ben Shapiro take. Let's jump in. How was your weekend?
Good. Mostly just recovering from the debate last week with Michael Knowles that people probably have seen at least clips from by now. But we did a debate at the University of Pittsburgh about whether the government should regulate transgenderism out of existence. Him win in the affirmative, me in the negative. And it was crazy. The students burned him in effigy. They set off explosives. They tried to shout us down. It was pretty wild. It got national media attention. So it's starting to simmer down. But
didn't they assault some cops?
Apparently, though I don't know, I can't say I've confirmed that. That's just what I heard, that multiple cops were treated for injuries after being assaulted, but I can't confirm that. But yeah.
Well, it certainly was, it raised to such a point that Tucker Carlson actually covered the protest on one of his last shows, it turns out. I think it was last Thursday or so he covered it, and it turns out Friday was his last show. So that was some mega bombshell news we got over the weekend. Both him and Don Lemon are out at CNN, which I just think is an interesting turn of events. We keep saying legacy media is dying. It's moving more towards our model. So I don't know. It feels like things are shifting around, but we'll see where it goes. But as far as where it's going in the media, one thing can be said for sure, which is that the Democrats don't really tend to like a free press so much anymore. And we saw some really crazy things in reaction to Tucker being pushed out at Fox.
Yeah, even before Tucker was pushed out at Fox, we saw AOC go viral over the weekend for essentially saying that the federal government should regulate Tucker Carlson off the air. Take a listen to this clip from an interview she did with MSNBC's Jen Psaki.
Federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other folks on Fox do, it is very, very clearly incitement of violence. Very clearly incitement of violence. And that is the line that I think we have to be willing to contend with.
So first off, her notion that what Fox News does is incitement of violence is just incorrect. Incitement of violence is already illegal. It's not considered free speech, but it has to be direct and proximate, calling for imminent lawless action and then likely to lead to that. You can't find anything you can criticize it, you can say you disagree with it, you can say it's inflammatory, but there's nothing that's aired on Fox News that's literally incitement to violence. And so she wants to stretch this legal category to basically just include the people she really doesn't like. And then that's, of course, or kind of Orwellian, an attack on the free press. But then the flip side is Jen Psaki, who was Biden's press secretary, is now an MSNBC host, is sitting there nodding along, and then she just moves on. And I'm like, ma'am, you're a journalist, you're a cable news host, and you're not going to object to somebody saying the federal government should regulate cable news? You really don't think that that's going to bite you in the butt just a few years down the line when another side takes power? Really?
Well, of course she doesn't think that, because she doesn't really care about having a free press. She's not a journalist. She's a puppet that worked for the Biden administration. And during her very tenure, that same administration tried to implement things like disinformation boards to censor speech. They were working to censor speech on Twitter. I don't see this as a surprise whatsoever when she left.
But just in her own self-interest, as an MSNBC host, she should know better, because what happens when there's a Republican president? They're going to do it to you too.
MSNBC is basically state media. And the thing is, I think these people truly believe that if they can get a hold of the narrative, they can get a hold of the press, they can get a hold of these online channels, that they can get to a one-party state. That's where they want to go. They don't really envision a world, I think, in 20, 30 years where you have a Republican Party, ultimately. Just listen to their language, right? They're constantly trying to demean anybody who's Republican, ultra MAGA, dangerous, domestic terrorists. Their ultimate goal is to make it such a toxic environment where if you support the Republican Party, party, you're seen as a Nazi and you're not welcome in polite society. And they want to get to a place where like you have to basically support the Democratic Party. So yeah, I think they're playing the long game. I don't think she's actually a journalist. I don't think MSNBC is actually really a journalistic outlet. It is something that pushes state narratives. And I think this is to be expected. To these people, anything that they dislike, anything that pushes back on their narratives or on their viewpoints is violence. They don't actually have any credibility when it comes to the line on those things. But I think their audience often goes along with it. They've got a bunch of people convinced that if you say something is mean or hurt somebody's feelings, that actually leads to actions and that you are then culpable for actions people take. And it really reminds me of like the, fringe 1990s where you had really conservative people basically trying to say if you listen to rappers like Eminem or you played video games and then you went and did something violent, it was the fault of those pieces of entertainment that made you violent. And increasingly, I think if you look at both worldviews, you see it's that they don't actually believe in individuality. They don't believe that you are responsible for your own fate. And that is why I think individualism is such an important component of our ideology, not just because we think you should be free to live your life free from government oppression or direction, but because I think that really that is the make of a man, right? You have free will to a certain extent at the very least. You can determine what you do, how you act, how you behave, and you should be responsible for that. And you should be able to benefit from that in good ways when you're doing the right thing. And you should be held responsible for it when it's in negative ways. And other people shouldn't be blamed for the actions of the individual. But I think that really gets to the crux of the difference in ideologies we have with people like this.
Yeah, it does. But I get frustrated in our politics because it feels like if you have a memory longer than a goldfish, you end up feeling like scratching your head all the time. Because I remember just a few years ago when Donald Trump was president, he would fight with the press a lot and he would say nasty things about the press. I don't actually recall him doing any actual censorship, but he would say things like the press are the enemy of the people. And I never really liked that kind of rhetoric. But I remember CNN and MSNBC clutching their pearls and screaming bloody murder about the free press and about how inappropriate it is for a government official to rail against the press. And now you have people on the opposite side of the aisle literally calling for the government to censor the press, and they're silently nodding along, platforming and propping up this idea and not even pushing back on it when they screamed bloody murder just over Trump's mean words about the press. It's crazy to me what a double standard that is.
And to go a little deeper than that, I mean, Trump did partake in some censorship. You actually covered this at base. It was more in the vein of trying to get people censored online on Twitter than it was actually going after the press. But I think that that's in the same spirit. And he also was pushing against things like Section 230, which is very much a very good free speech law. And you saw the left even then sort of condemning Trump for some of this rhetoric, but then policy-wise going along with him, introducing bills to reform Section 230. So their hypocrisy has always been pretty apparent to me on this regard.
So one thing that's concerning to me is that it's not just AOC out there on her own. Like sometimes she takes these fringe stands, but most of the Democrats aren't on board. Chuck Schumer, who is the Senate Majority Leader and one of the most prominent leaders of their party, appeared to suggest pretty much the same thing in another interview. Take a listen to this.
Look, Fox needs to reckon with the lies that it spread, and it may literally have to pay for the lies that it spread. But is it the role of government officials to demand that media organizations say things or tell media organizations what to put on their airwaves?
Well, it's hardly the first time that people have said Channel 4 should have done this, the New York Times should have done that. That's not unusual. But what has happened here is, John, very unusual. This is not simply telling them what to do. This is telling them, showing them, that they have hurt our democracy probably in a way that no other actor, maybe with the exception of Donald Trump, who used them, has done. And so when it's that vital, I think we not only have a right to tell Rupert Murdoch and Fox what to do, but an obligation. And I hope people from one end of the country to the other will call up Fox and say, do what Leader Hakeem Jeffries and I asked for, which is stop the lies, say they were wrong, and report the news. You may have a different way of reporting the news than someone else, fine, but lying is not part of that different way and cannot be.
So think about that for a second. You have a sitting senator and leader of the Democratic Party saying they have the right to tell Fox News what to do. No, you don't. You don't.
Yeah, you fundamentally do not have that right, no matter what Fox is saying. You, as a sitting politician, that is a outright violation of the First Amendment if you try to do that. But furthermore, he tries to say that they have this obligation to make sure that companies like Fox are reporting the truth. Number one, I think government agents, including politicians, are the least capable parties of determining what is the truth or what is not. And we've seen that time and time again, especially over the past 3 years. Nobody's been more wrong. Nobody's been more incapable of actually discerning what is the truth when there is a lot of information flying around than people in the government. So the idea that they can decide that and should then mandate what companies say and how they report and what's actually the news and what is the truth, that's fascism. That's what you see in fascism countries, and there's no reason to think that having that level of government oppression would do anything other than prevent people from getting information that they vitally need. Now, I agree that the election theories that were pushed in 2019 and 2020 by the Trump administration and by some in the media were absolutely false. But the way that we were able to push back on that was by people like you and I, even with independent media, going on YouTube, going on Facebook and saying, these things are false. This is not true. They're not even trying to allege this in court. There's no evidence that this happened. And because of that pushback, these things were laid bare. And I think at this point, you have to be pretty into the fringes to still think that the election was stolen. So I don't want to discount the importance of being able to call out things that are false and present counter information. And that was a pretty big lie that could have had really detrimental effects in our society. I don't take it lightly that they were lying about the election being stolen. But the idea that the solution to that is for the government to come in and mandate truth and be the arbiter of that is, you have to be off your ass to think that that is a good idea. I mean, there is nothing throughout history that would indicate that is a route you want to go down.
And again, just switch the words. Imagine Donald Trump as president in 2018 saying, I have not only the right, but the obligation to tell CNN what it can and can't do. Imagine the meltdown. And you know what? They'd be right. I would be agreeing with them. But it's like people are so inconsistent and they're so short-sighted too. They really don't want to set this precedent because they always do this on the left. They overreach, they break the rules, they shatter a norm, and then they don't think a few years ahead, and then the other side takes power and then does it to them right back. And then they were all upset. And it's like, anyone with two brain cells to rub together could have seen that coming, but you just wanted in the moment to, make headlines or get yourself attention or seem like you're fighting the right or whatever. And it's just depressing to me that people are so incredibly short-sighted.
Well, we have one more clip in the same vein we have to discuss, and that is AOC popping off yet again, basically dancing on Tucker Carlson's grave and saying that deplatforming works. Play this clip.
Tucker Carlson is out at Fox News. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. What I will say, though, is while I'm very glad that the person that was arguably responsible for some of the largest, driving some of the most amounts of death threats and violent threats, not just to my office, but to plenty of people across the country, I also kind of feel like I'm like waiting for the cutscene at the end of a Marvel movie after all the credits have rolled. And then you see like the villain's like hand reemerge out to grip over like the end of a building or something. But deplatforming works and it is important. And there you go. Good things can happen.
So, Brad, do you think deplatforming works for Tucker Carlson? Let's be serious.
No, I mean, I think it's possible that he'll go independent and start reaching more people than ever before. You think like his show on Fox was getting, I think, 2 million-ish a night, which is really good for cable news. But Joe Rogan gets multiple times more than that. And I think he could build a Joe Rogan-style independent new media empire. He's such a big name. The idea that he's being deplatformed, wherever he goes, he'll have a massive audience. It might even end up being bigger, which happens sometimes because when you censor somebody, you make them seem cool and off limits and like why don't they want you to hear what I have to say and everything. It also just strikes me as so inappropriate for a government official to be cheering. And I'm sure Trump did this, actually, cheered about like people getting canned or fired or whatever as well. But for a government official to be like celebrating or calling for media members to be fired and to lose their platform and everything isn't a literal violation of the First Amendment, but it's certainly against those principles, right? That we should have a firewall between the government and the press. But she doesn't care about that. And she's just so glib about it. But I don't think it works. And I also, you know what, like, do you want your people deplatformed, right? Do you want them to come for your media allies? It's just so short-sighted. And also, I reject the idea that Tucker is responsible for any viewers who sent her death threats, because though, you know who's responsible for that? Those viewers. They have agency. They're individuals, and they should be prosecuted for it or whatever. But unless Tucker actually said anything to the extent of, please do this, you can't blame him for other people's actions. Like, I hate this this principle of like transposition from one person onto another, the responsibility of something bad. That's like saying Bernie Sanders has a moral obligation because or guilt from the Capitol baseball game shooting because that guy was a Bernie Sanders person who hated the Republicans because of Bernie Sanders' talking points about healthcare. He doesn't. The only person with moral culpability there is that crazy shooter. It's not Bernie's fault. He never told anyone to go hurt anyone. And in the same vein, it's not Tucker's fault if a few out of his millions of viewers are crazy and do crazy things. And the whole thing, it makes me want to barf, this whole video.
Yeah, I think it's absurd. Unless Tucker's saying, send AOC death threats. He's not responsible for people sending you death threats just because he covers the idiotic things that you say and do. And I think that that's a problem, is that she doesn't think anybody should be able to actually call her out or say what she does is stupid. And when there's necessary blowback to some of that, and I don't think death threats are necessary blowback, but you are going to get blowback as a politician and people shouting you down and telling you and condemning your actions, she equates all of that with violence and things that shouldn't happen. Like, ma'am, you ran for office. You are going to be held accountable. People are going to scrutinize the things that you do. Now, again, death threats are a line that should never be crossed, but that's already illegal, and that is the responsibility of those crazy people who are doing that. And I'm sure actions taken against them. If you write death threats to a sitting politician, guess what? You don't just get to go off into the sunset. Usually you get pretty heavily investigated by the FBI. That's not Tucker Carlson's fault. I think that is just an absurd allegation. I agree with you. It's really disgusting that we're at a point where politicians are openly condemning free speech or openly attacking the free press. And if that doesn't really give you very bad vibes, you don't know history very well at all, because these are often the true signs that a country is beginning to have a demise and that you are seeing more and more elements of fascism and fascism ideas seeping into the government's ideology. And it says that they're not really all that afraid of the people or the courts at this point when they are openly threatening the press like this. Fox News is the largest cable news company, and it's not even particularly close. They're very wealthy, they're very powerful, and yet politicians are openly going after them. That really shows you why the plight of somebody like Julian Assange is so bleak, because people who don't have the same amount of resources to stand up to people like this really don't stand a fighting chance for long if we keep moving in this direction. So it's all very, very problematic. But I also think the thing with people like AOC is that she loves deplatforming because she can't actually argue the ideology, right? She can't actually defend her beliefs. She can't stand up for anything. So her only recourse is to try to deplatform and silence people. Now, like you said, that doesn't work. It actually usually gives their views more credence, more interest, because you've made it, edgy and banned and cool. People want to find out what they're saying. So I don't think this kind of thing will ultimately hurt Tucker Carlson. I think he'll be a very wealthy and successful commentator no matter what he chooses to do next. But I think that speaks volume about the far left's inability to actually defend their ideas. And instead of being able to actually have debates and work through things, they just want to silence people. And they rest in the assurance that I think they feel they have, that they will maintain the majority of the country and that they'll always be the ones on top. That, of course, can't be true forever. I will say, though, it's probably going to be true for the next couple decades if Republicans don't get their act together, because they're acting a fool on the other side, too. And so it's bad news for the country as a whole, but I think very short-sighted in a historical lens.
Hey guys, Brad here. I want to tell you about another podcast you might like since you're a fan of based politics. Undivided with Brandy Cruz, a Seattle-based podcast that looks to give a voice to Americans who can't stand either major political movement. The show is a mix of commentary on key issues and in-depth interviews that challenge mainstream narratives on topics like race, gender, and criminal justice. The host, Brandy Cruz, is a longtime TV journalist who quit corporate media out of frustration for how the press was covering political violence carried out by the left in 2020. Find out how you can watch or listen to Undivided by visiting undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com. A link will be in the show notes. Speaking of bad news for the country, I want to talk about a new rule the Biden administration is putting forward that will make mortgages more expensive for responsible people with good credit scores and do that all to subsidize people with worse credit scores, because we're living in the upside down world where sound economics no longer has any relation to policy making and where we don't believe in meritocracy, but we want to reward poor decisions and punish people who make good decisions. So, Hannah, have you heard about this policy floating around in the news?
I have. Like I said, I've been on vacation the past couple days, so I haven't dug in as deeply as I normally would, but I've seen a few things on TikTok and on Twitter. I think I commented. And I mean, this is just so obviously on its face a bad idea. You don't want to reward people who make poor choices, and you especially don't want to punish people who do the right things. But increasingly in society, that's how it feels. I as somebody who does try really hard to do the right thing at all times and work really hard and be ethical and be fair-minded and, just follow the values I was raised with, how you should move about in the world to be a successful and, good member of society. It feels like those things are increasingly looked down upon and punished by actual government intervention. And that is just a recipe for disaster.
And that is exactly what we're talking about here. I'll read you for some details from the Wall Street Journal. Income redistribution is an abiding value of the Biden administration, and now it wants to spread that to mortgage lending. A new rule will raise mortgage fees for borrowers with good credit to subsidize higher risk borrowers. Under the rule, which goes into effect May 1st, homebuyers with a good credit score over 680 will pay about $40 more each month on a $400,000 loan, and upward depending on the size of the loan. Those who make down payments of 20% on their homes will pay the highest fees. Those payments will then be used to subsidize higher risk borrowers through lower fees. And this is all happening because the FHFA regulates federal mortgage guarantors Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are backed by taxpayers, so they can exert this influence on their mortgage policies. So those are the details. We're talking about a significant amount of money, not perhaps an end of the world amount of money, but that adds up to thousands of dollars more over the cost of the lifetime of a mortgage. And I think for me, it's more the principle that's wrong of like punishing the people that have made good decisions and haven't, ruined their credit score with reckless credit card spending, to enable the people who have not made good decisions. And also, can we just talk about this for a second? Subsidizing people to get houses they can't actually afford. Where have we heard that before? Kind of sounds like 2008 to me, and that didn't end very well, did it?
It absolutely didn't. I just did the math really quick because one thing I've noticed with these sorts of policies is it sounds kind of small. If you hear it, you're like, oh, $40 a month, like boo-hoo. No, if you have a 30-year mortgage, which is average, that equates to $14,400 more that you have to pay.
Wow, that's not a small amount of money then.
So yeah, not such a small amount. And again, when I think the other thing too is the way they bake this in, it's meant to make it sound like, look, we're just going after the rich. A $400,000 house is no longer the rich in this country. I want to say off the top of my head that the average home price in the country is something like $350,000 to $370,000. So a $400,000 house is very much an average family. You're already looking at having to cough up thousands of dollars, especially now, and extra interest because the government's spending like it just got a 2-week to live chemo diagnosis and printed a whole bunch more dollars, and now you're paying thousands of dollars more in inflation just to buy that $400,000 house. And now they're going to tack this on if you've actually managed to save the money for a down payment. You actually have good credit. That means to have good credit's not tough. That means you've paid your bills on time. That means you've been ethical.
You don't have to be rich to have good credit.
No, that has nothing to do with being rich. That has to do with being responsible and making good decisions and doing and repaying your debts as you say that you will, right? And now you're going to pay an extra $14,400 on top of all the extra interest money, on top of the fact that your home price is inflated as well because of the government's intervention into the housing market. It's just, this is the kind of thing that really infuriates me because it is what is killing the middle class. It is absolutely gutting people who simply do the right thing, who want to live modestly, who want to pursue the American dream. They're not asking for much. They just want to play by the rules of the game as they were set out. And they keep getting screwed. And it is infuriating because I don't think that you should be subsidized if you've made poor life choices. I don't think you should be subsidized if you are higher risk, that you are less likely to pay back your investment. I don't think I should have to float you on that. That's just punitive. It's immoral. It's economically backwards. It doesn't in any way suggest that these people who are higher risk will pull themselves out of poverty, because likely if they're not able to pay their bills and within their means, they're not going to do that just because you magically give them a housing loan. That is exactly what we saw happen in the housing crisis. So they gave all these loans to people who should never have been approved for loans because they didn't look like they were probably going to be able to make their bills and make their payments. And then guess what? They didn't. And the housing market collapsed. And guess who else paid for that? The rest of society, because then we all had to go through a very recession. Yes, it is a cyclical formula that keeps replicating, and I'm sick of it. Life is not fair. And I'm tired of people who want to pretend that this is Disney World and that it is. Everybody does start off at different places in life. That's unfortunate, but it's a reality. The thing that we can do is level the playing field, which we tried to do in early America, and say, we're not going to present extra barriers. If you work really hard, you can overcome some of this. There will be class mobility for people who want to work harder. And yes, some people are born wealthier. Some people are born with better parents. Some people are born with more advantages. But that is just life. That is how it is. But as long as you're able to have a fair competition and compete, that's about as fair as it can get in the real adult world. We're removing that element from our society, and it's going to be disastrous because the people who, formerly would do the right thing, who would pay their bills, they're going to get to a point. I already see it happening around me with a lot of people where it's like, why bother? Why bother? Why am I going to work 2-3 jobs to get ahead? Why am I going to live with my parents for 2 years to save up for a down payment? Why am I going to pay back my student loans that I took out? Why am I going to do any of these things when I could not and live recklessly and still end up in the same position? Right.
Yeah.
And so then you've got a lot more people who are living as bottom dwellers trying to leech off others, a lot fewer people they can leech off of. That game doesn't last very long, folks.
No, and it's a bad idea because it's not just right-wing media or conservatives or libertarians who are calling it out, but you actually have a prominent a former Obama housing official in the federal government, David Stevens, came out and just said this is a terrible idea. Take a listen.
It's very concerning. We're at a period where interest rates have risen. We're all seeing the home sales data and seeing how much home sales are declining because of these rising interest rates. And now we're adding this second whammy to good credit-worthy home buyers who are now going to have to pay for other people's mortgages. And that's something that I think is a real bad reaction.
Yeah, so he points out there that housing sales are significantly down and the rising interest rates are already making housing way more expensive to buy a house. And now we're going to just add a cherry to the top to make it even worse, all in service of some nameless equity anti-merit agenda.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster. I've actually already seen several people on TikTok, realtors and other people who are really interested in the real estate market, calling this out and showing properties across the country that they're trying to sell them. They thought they're going to be investment properties. They're not selling. People are already taking hundreds of thousands of dollars of losses on some of these properties that bought high. It's going to come crashing down. I think that maybe not all the way down, because I think there is an actual supply limit that we actually don't have enough houses. So it's not going to bottom out necessarily. But I do think a significant number of people are going to take a bath on some of the properties they bought. And I think right now you're going to see people continue to hold. You're not going to have as much of a buyer's market. So that means people won't have the same mobility they did before. It's not a good idea for anybody who has a house. They want to see their property maintain value and continue to increase in a normal, modest amount year in, year out. That's what you should be able to anticipate. I think these decisions ultimately could stagnate that. And, people in Obama's administration, I would hope at least learn from the lessons they oversaw during the last housing market crisis. So you should probably listen to them.
All right, let's move on to our quick hit segment. Up first, we've got our buddy Ben Shapiro, who often has good takes on questions of limited government or free markets, but when certain issues come up, those takes and those values just apparently go completely out the window. And the biggest issue of all of those is trans issues, drag issues, LGBT issues, because he apparently wants the government to scan people's chromosomes and police our wardrobes. Take a listen to this really weird clip.
Should wearing dresses and skirts be illegal for men in public? If so, should wearing pants for women be illegal in public? Well, pants not so much, because there is a female version of pants that is nearly indistinguishable in many cases from male pants. But men wearing traditional female clothing in public, I think that there's a case that local communities should be able to stop that. Sure. I mean, we have local laws about being naked or indecent exposure, or at least we used to.
So I'm wondering how this works. Like, so many transgender people pass and you can't actually tell. So are the police going to stop people on the street, scan them for their chromosomes, and then arrest them if they're wearing the wrong clothing that the government doesn't approve of? Like, in what universe can you support limited government and then fix your mouth to say stuff like this?
You fundamentally can't. This is just an absolutely ridiculous statement at this point. I don't get Ben Shapiro. I think he's smarter than this. I'm kind of disappointed to see him playing the lowest common denominator in his base just to rile people up over transgender issues. Men have worn dresses for as long as women have throughout history. That is in many cultures continues to be the dominant dress style. There's nothing inherently feminine about a dress. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the idea that you need to police the kind of clothing that people wear in general is just very creepy and autocratic. And I just think you need bigger problems in your life if this is something you're concerned about. You should not be bothered by a man wearing a dress, just like you should not be bothered by women wearing pants. If that is something that bothers you, you need to really evaluate your life and maybe like go touch grass and find somewhere to volunteer.
But also, even if you are bothered by it, like, you are entitled to your own opinion. But there's a universe between I don't think men should wear dresses, and I want a police state making that illegal. There's a big difference there.
I agree with you, but I also think I've read something actual data that shows people who are libertarians have a lower like gross factor. Like, they're not as like bothered by things around them as compared to like progressives, and conservatives are the worst of all. And I think you see this play out over and over, and it's where those sort of urgings start, right? You become a Karen if you're on the left, you become this if you're on the right, where like you're just a little too bothered by what other people are doing when it does not impact you. And I think if you don't want to get to like this creepy big government oppressive society, you need to start to recognize like it's actually a you problem. You shouldn't be that concerned with what other people are doing in their lives. If it's not actually harming you or your property, get all the way over it and keep it moving and just focus on your own life and making it better, and focus on like investing in your kids or find a more meaningful hobby. I don't know. There's a lot of things you could do before you end up like this, or before you end up like calling the manager over things. Like, I do think it's a self problem. It ends up playing out when people want to then take it a step further and regulate it. But it actually does begin with like your own, nosiness, busybodiness, being too concerned with what other people do.
Yeah, and I'll say this, a government big enough to police your wardrobe is big enough to tell you can't wear a yarmulke in public in areas where that's not supported by the majority. And I guess you could say that's a religion thing, but you could say that wearing certain clothes is a free speech thing. So I think this is a terrible idea. It's incredibly short-sighted. I don't know how they can, the Daily Wire folks can seemingly understand the limits of government on many issues. And then on this one, they're just all of a sudden like their inner communist freak flag just comes out and flies. Like,
hold on. Where do they see the benefits of limited government over there these days? Because I haven't seen it in a minute.
I mean, look, I've listened to Ben Shapiro for years, and he makes incredibly compelling cases against big government spending, against regulation, on many issues, really. I mean, throughout the Trump administration, he would push back on emergency declarations. On the Biden administration, they literally sued to block the federal government's vaccine mandate. I mean, they do on a number of issues, but they have this cognitive dissonance on some of these issues with the people they really don't like. And it's like, look, you're entitled to your own opinion. I don't share it. But if you don't support freedom for the people you don't like, you don't actually support it, because that's the hard part, right? It's easy to support it for your friends. And I also just say, you always get people when you respond to something that Shapiro or Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles says, you always get people in the replies that are trying to distort their position or defend their position. They're saying, well, he's just talking about like local communities that are saying like, oh, well, in our church, you can't wear this, or at my house, you can't wear this. And no, he very clearly cited laws. And the question was, should it be illegal? And he answered in the affirmative. And then he cites other laws. He's not talking about civil society. He's talking about the government and the state. And they always try to squirm away. They do this Mott and Bailey thing where you call them out for their position and they try to retreat to a less controversial position and act like that's what they're actually having to defend. Like, no, we can see what you said. We're not taking you out of context. I don't do that to people. I always try to confirm that I'm not misunderstanding their position. And what your position is here is antithetical to civil liberties or limited government or any of these things that you say you support. And I just think it's totally nuts and just low-level pandering to the lowest level common denominator. So up next, we've got a really interesting video done by the economist Stephen Moore, who's a free marketeer with the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. I read his newsletter every day, very much, like a kind of economic hero in right-wing circles. He did something really interesting. He went to the Patriotic Millionaires, which is a group of millionaires who advocate for taxing the rich. They say it's our patriotic duty to pay more taxes. He went to their event and he asked them to sign a pledge that they will voluntarily start donating more. The IRS accepts unlimited taxes. You can pay more than you owe if you want. And interestingly enough, Hannah, you'll have to wonder and figure out how they responded. Take a listen.
I'm a former managing director at BlackRock. We want to pay higher taxes, and everyone else wants to pay higher taxes as well.
Hi, Steve Moore here. I'm here at the Patriotic Millionaires press conference where a bunch of millionaires said they want to pay higher taxes and they're advocating for it, but they won't sign a pledge saying they're willing to pay the taxes that they endorse. In fact, not one of these patriotic millionaires raised their hand and said, I'm willing to pay more taxes voluntarily. Thank you, by the way, for doing this. And it's incredibly patriotic what you're talking about in terms of being willing to pay more taxes. I think, Myron, you started out this press conference by saying you want to pay more taxes. And so I represent a group called the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, and we have these pledges. How many of you are millionaires here? I know you are, a number of you. We're hoping that each one of you will sign this pledge, which says that you will pay a 90% tax, just as you're endorsing today, because you say it's your patriotic duty to do so. And so I'm hoping that each one of you will sign this pledge that says I'm willing to pay a 90% tax, because it's your, as you said, it's your patriotic.
So let me understand. You want me to do that individually, or you want me to do it?
Miss Disney. Yeah, let's get people. I've got pens. Let's sign these. So we can solve the problem. No, we want. You all said that you wanted to pay. You said you wanted to pay more taxes.
We want to change the system.
No. You said you want to pay more taxes. So don't you think it's your duty?
Can we keep this to press?
I'm sorry. Don't you think it's your patriotic duty to pay more taxes if you're saying that?
That the voluntary paying of more is not what it is.
But you all are millionaires.
Sorry, we got another question.
Okay, I'm just because you guys are millionaires, and you're saying you don't want to pay more. Wait, you do or you don't want to pay more taxes? What?
Yes, it's disingenuous to say.
Why?
The voluntary change to the law is going to make a structural difference.
But you all could make a huge difference.
So are you shocked that none of these patriotic millionaires were willing to do their patriotic duty to the country?
I'm not shocked, because they didn't really need to have a whole conference and press conference just to pay more taxes if they wanted to. So this was obviously meant to virtue signal. And I think that ultimately, even millionaires, their anticipation is that when you tax the rich, you're taxing people above them. I think so often that's the perception people have when they want more taxes. They never think it's coming after them, no matter where the line is. It's always like a little bit above where they're at. So they probably think go after the billionaires and the 100,000ers. Like,
or they're willing to pay taxes, but only if everyone else is forced to as well. Right. And it's like, well, you said it's your patriotic duty. Shouldn't you do your patriotic duty whether or not you're forced to?
Yeah, this was a great gotcha, because honestly, on top of all of that, if you really are that bothered by things going on in the world, you don't have to go give the government your money. You could just start doing things. You could just open charities. You could just start volunteering. You could give people your money directly. All that would go a whole lot further than writing a check to the IRS. And yet you don't see that energy, because I don't think you really have a whole lot of volunteerism or, the desire to really do good in the world so much as you want to force other people to do good in the world and take care of problems that you see. So it's interesting to me because, I give the libertarians a hard time sometimes, even though I do consider myself ideologically a libertarian. The party can sometimes drive me nuts, but I have spoken to a number of their conventions, and the one thing I notice is there's not a ton of people at these conventions, but they are some of the most active, involved people you'll ever meet. When I was down at LP Florida this week, almost every single person I talked to there had some sort of initiative they were trying to get off the ground, some kind of voluntary project that they were working on, some nonprofit they were trying to start, some piece of legislation they were trying to advance, just different ways they were giving back. And it's really interesting to me because to my knowledge, none of those people were, particularly wealthy or had huge platforms or had a lot of connections. And yet they were just looking at the world around them and saying, here's something I can do to give back. Here's something I can do to immediately make the world around me better, to make my community better, and just doing it. And I think that that's the beauty of our ideology, is that one, government is never good at doing things. It never does it efficiently as other people can at a individual community level. But number two, if you really wanted to do good, you could. And the people who are usually pushing for big government, I find, are some of the least involved in their communities and give back the least to charity. So this tracks with everything I've seen around me during my time working in politics.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying, because if you're one of these wealthy people and you care about the issues, right? Like, it seems to me giving more money to the government is the worst way to address those issues. Some of that money might eventually get through to the people that need it, but so much of it will be wasted or lost or doled out to political allies. I mean, we're talking about the people that spent trillions of dollars and countless American lives in Afghanistan in 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban, right? Like, this is not they lost hundreds of billions of dollars to COVID scammers and fraudsters with their big stimulus efforts, because they just gave the money away with like basically no verification requirements. And they don't care because it's other people's money, right? That's the thing about the government. They're responsible for spending other people's money on other people. That's not a recipe for efficiency or for, really frugal behavior. It's the opposite. And yet y'all are mad because you want more. We also already have a pretty progressive tax system. People love to say tax the rich. We already tax the rich quite a bit, more than many of our peer nations, who actually what they have is much heavier middle and working class taxes. And that's what people really are advocating for, because you couldn't even fund a portion of what most of these progressives in our politics today want just by taxing millionaires and billionaires, not even close. But I just love the irony. I thought this was brilliantly done, really funny. Kudos to Steve Moore and the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. Check out their work if you haven't yet. But we need more stuff like this. Just, you're not screaming at anybody. You're not calling anybody names. You're just showing up and holding them to account and letting the results speak for themselves. So bravo to that.
Well, when it comes to holding people to account, many of these government bureaucrats that these rich people want to give so much more money to allocate, turns out they can't even manage their own finances. You have to hear this high-key, hilarious clip of a woman who called into the Dave Ramsey show recently wanting financial help for her and her partner. And it turns out, best of all, they work for the government. Roll this clip.
We have probably just under $1 million in debt, and we want to know how to get debt-free without filing bankruptcy.
Okay. How much of that is a mortgage?
The mortgage, about $210,000.
So you have $600,000 in what?
$335,000 is about in student loans. We both have advanced degrees, and then the rest is really credit cards and personal loans.
So you have $300,000 of credit cards and personal loans?
We have about $335,000 in student loans and about $136,000 in credit cards, $44,000 personal loans, and $35,000 car loans.
Okay. How old are you all?
I'm 29.
Okay. So what in the world? Are you both on this, or is this just one of you that's completely lost your mind?
Well, I have the majority of the student loans, and he has the majority of the credit cards. My credit card debt is not great.
Okay,
it's
so
about
why does he at 29 years old run up $100,000 in credit card debt?
Well, he's 32, but I think it's one of those things where just making really poor financial decisions, thinking be able to pay it down as you go, and then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And
okay, so you both have advanced degrees. What are your degrees in?
We do. So I have a degree, both of our advanced degrees. No, he has an MBA, and I have an advanced degree in policy. I work in the government, and we actually both do now at this point, actually.
Okay, so your household income is what?
Our household income is about $230,000.
Okay, all right. Is there recognition on both of your parts how absurd this situation is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there is.
Right.
So I think we're both a bit scared and want to do anything we can to avoid.
Okay, great. Then I'm on your team. I can skip that step. Okay, good. Okay, well, you're scared, and you should be. You're disgusted, and you should be.
We are.
You're in the early stages of being sick and tired, and you should be. So here's the thing. You guys have been living at across the board, from your education choices to your car purchases to your whatever. You've been living at about 10x where you're going to get to live for the next 3 years.
Okay. Yep, that's true.
So I'm getting ready to destroy your life as you know it, because your lifestyle is considerably above your extremely good income, and has been for a period of time. And so you've gotten used to spending like you're in Congress.
Right.
This is going to be very emotional for y'all. And you're going to have to look at it through that lens and through a spiritual lens, or you're not going to make it. You're going to have to not care what anyone thinks, including each other, because you're not going to spend any money on anything ever.
Brad, when I first saw this video, it frankly gave me hives. My jaw dropped at these numbers, and I have, many thoughts on Dave Ramsey. I was given Dave Ramsey right when I graduated college. I think Dave Ramsey has good financial advice, mostly for people like this, mostly for people who are absolutely cracked and need to get a hold of their finances. And I don't think he's really great if you're trying to invest, but thank God he exists for people like this. What was your reaction?
Oh my gosh. I was just in disbelief. First, I was in disbelief and horror, like gaping, like you would at the sight of a horrible crash.
Yeah.
But then it turned to outrage because I remembered all the ways, like President Biden thinks that I should pay off their student loans.
Yeah.
They literally got themselves in a situation where their household income is $230,000. That is a lot. It's like 4 or 5 times the average. And yet they ended up $1 million in debt, including hundreds of thousands in credit card debt. That's literally just them being irresponsible. That's just them living way beyond their means and and yet we're supposed to pay their student loans. And also, how do you end up with $335,000 in student loans when you're going to work for the government? Like, you should be going to public schools or making more reasonable education choices. That's what you should take out if you're going to become a plastic surgeon and make millions. Otherwise, I mean, I don't know what path you're going down there, but this whole thing, geez, like I said, hives, then outrage.
and they work in the government. That's the part where I really lost it, where she's like, we both work in the government at this point. I have a degree in...
Of course, because you couldn't have this lack of financial sense and work in the private sector. You'd be fired for losing money for your company.
Yes, but I want to speak to something bigger here, and I have the same reaction as you. It's outrage that these are the people who get to make decisions over our money and how we're going to spend things, and also that they are wanting to give themselves a break when it comes to these kinds of habits. But I also think it speaks to a deeper problem in America, because I grew up pretty middle class, and I remember even as a kid looking around and being like, how are so many people affording to do all these things my family can't afford to do? Like, we went on a vacation a year, went to like the beach. Like, we weren't going to Disney World every year or going, like, to me, that was extravagant. And then when I became an adult, I had the same reaction. I had a decent income right out of college, nothing great, but like, I was above average, and looking around all these people near me, like, how do they afford to travel? How do they afford these cars? How do they afford these clothes? And I'm just really baffled by it. And it probably took me 10 years out of college to realize, like, oh, everybody is in sinking debt. They are drowning in debt. And I have always lived kind of like Dave Ramsey encourages. I hoard money and don't take on very much debt at all, and it terrifies me. Even right now, I could afford to go buy a brand new car. I love a Land Rover, for example. Guess what? I don't. I drive a 2015 Lexus that my brother got for me through his dealership that I got at cost for $20,000, and it's in great shape, and I'll drive it till it falls apart, because why would I not? That would be so stupid of me to just go sink $60,000, $70,000 into a Land Rover. But I think a lot of people don't think like that in our country. They have this need for immediate gratification. I think a lot of people are trying to keep up with the Joneses, and so they're buying things to look wealthy while, inside their house is crumbling. And to me, this is just terrifying. The average American, I want to say, I think this is still true, has less than $1,000 in their savings account. They cannot afford any sort of, that's like your brakes needing to be replaced. Like, that's like a home water heater going on. Your basic kind of standard things you could expect to have to pay in life as you go throughout the course of a year. The average American is not prepared for that, and they certainly don't have savings to fall back on for retirement or if they become disabled. And it's just this complete lack of planning for your future that I think is really dangerous, but I also think spells disaster for us down the road, especially with our generation that isn't buying houses as much. A lot of people plan on their house covering a lot of their retirement and have been able to bank on that to some extent. I don't know if that's true. A lot of people have been able to bank on Social Security for many decades. I don't know that that's true. So when you start looking at the baby boomers retiring, which is going to be a massive load on society, just the size of that generation and the fact that they're living so much longer than they used to, society being able to sustain that for people who have not planned ahead, who have not laid out foundations for their retirement, it's going to be a huge problem. And, these people are young. She says they're 29 and 32. It doesn't sound like they have kids. And they have amassed this much in debt. That is terrifying. I don't know how you get out of that. You can live as frugal as you want, but that's a lot of debt to pay down. So it does scare me for our country, just that I don't think this is that outside. I mean, yes, I think most people have $1 million.
Okay, it's an outlier.
They're an outlier, but most people are carrying a substantial amount of debt and don't have savings or a plan to rectify that situation.
Yeah, no, which for me is all the more reason that we shouldn't be eroding what little savings they have through inflation and then making them pay for other people's bad mistakes. Because that's the thing is I don't feel bad for these people. I mean, I'm not happy that they're in a bad situation. I take no joy in it, but I don't give them any sympathy. And I think they should have to sleep in the bed that they made, right? Maybe they have to go bankrupt and they can never get credit again in their life. I don't know. But what shouldn't happen is, for example, like the Elizabeth Warrens and the Bernie Sanders of the world think that we should not just pay 10 or 20,000 like Biden's proposed. We should pay all that $335,000 in student loan debt. Although some of it may be for advanced degrees, but there are some people who even want the taxpayer to pay that. And the idea that taxpayers should have to step in. There are people who want credit card to be canceled, credit card debt to be canceled, healthcare debt to be canceled, regardless of the circumstances it was obtained in. And all of that, to me, it just, if we want to have a meritocracy in our society, we have to let people rise and fall by their own decisions. And that includes people who make really bad decisions. They should have to live with the consequences of them, because when you start bailing people out of their decisions and the consequences, you incentivize more bad decision making. And I feel like this kind of situation is where you end up as a society after years and years and years of bailing people out of their bad decisions. Because if they truly thought and knew all along they were going to be on the hook for all of this, I can't imagine they would have taken out all that debt and made those decisions. So I do wish them the best. But I hope that people don't go down this path. And if they do, they certainly don't come looking for a handout from me, because they will get no sympathy.
Same here. Okay, well, let's move on to our mailbag. First up this week, we have a comment from the Having Report that says, kudos to Bernie for circling back and discussing what the right refuses to, income and wealth inequality. Y'all rather talk about trans and sports 99% of the time and turn everything into a culture war than tackle the real issue that Bernie, one of the few, brings up. Now, I will say here, Brad and I hate having to talk about trans issues all the time. We also feel the need to jump in and defend trans people from some of the craziness on the right. We also feel the need to restore some, common sense when it comes to discussion on the left. But I agree. Like, I'd rather talk about money and income inequality, if that even exists, but talk about those issues and really debate real theory and policy than spend time on the culture war. But I think as commentators, you do get pulled into doing both. But when it comes to saying that Bernie's the only person discussing these things, I don't think that's true whatsoever. Many people have been discussing sound economic theory far longer than Bernie. Bernie likes to throw around terms and use it to drive his progressive ideology, but he doesn't really stick to it, number one. He often just uses it to get wealthier himself. Doesn't actually seem to have a whole lot of principle stances when it comes to living out those beliefs. But secondarily, I think when it comes to wealth and income inequality, those are made up terms. Income inequality doesn't matter, period. I'll say that over and over and over again. It doesn't matter if somebody has more money than you, period. It matters that you have the ability to pursue your own purposes and your own dreams, and that you are able to get ahead in life and benefit from the work that you are producing. But just somebody having more money than you in of itself is not a problem. It's not a fixed pie of money in America. People in the left tend to have this mentality that there's like this set portion of money, and if that person has 10 out of the 100 pieces of the pie, then that's this money you can never access, and that's going to keep anybody else from getting richer. And that's just not how things work.
No, it's not. Yeah, I agree. I don't obsess over income and wealth inequality, with the exception of when it's derived through cronyism and corruption. But in general, I mean, people don't deserve the same. People shouldn't be equal. Some people should earn a lot more than others because they work harder, or even if they don't work harder, their skills and talents are much more socially useful and in demand. And that's how we want to organize our society, to reward the things that are most productive and most needed the most. I don't see anything wrong with that. And I think the idea, you're not worse off because your neighbor has a lot of money, right? You're affected by your actual absolute circumstances, not your relative circumstances. The only way that affects you is in your head. And that's a you thing that you've got to get right with. If you're living your life in envy and resentment, that's coming from within. That's not coming from without. And I think the obsession over income inequality and wealth inequality, again, except in circumstances where it's derived through cronyism, it's just a pointless conversation because I don't care. Now, moving on, we've got Matitia Loran, who is a regular viewer, and I'm sorry, I probably butchered her name. Let us know how it's pronounced. And she says that the fact that capitalism is a flawed system is an issue worth discussing, but for that discussion to have any value at all requires acknowledging and addressing the utter failure of the alternatives to it. Yeah, I think that's valid. I will say I don't think capitalism is perfect, but I think a lot of the things that are attributed to the flaws of capitalism in America aren't actually because markets are so free and unrestricted, but because they are heavily subsidized and distorted and regulated and restricted. And so then they don't quite work. But you can't necessarily judge capitalism off of that. So,
Yeah.
But I take the core of the point very well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's important to address what people see as flaws of capitalism or see as failures within the system and help them understand why those things were created by government intervention into the market, which is an attack on capitalism, not a component of it. But I do like discussing those things, and I think we get a lot further when we can acknowledge some of these failures in our system and help people understand the differences of what is the economy and what is the government and what's really culpable there. All right, William Defoe, who notably has no profile picture, says Hannah is a 5 out of 10 with less humility than a Kardashian.
I'm sorry, I put this in there because I saw it and I geeked out.
It's hilarious. I mean, I'm sure if I'm a 5, I'm sure this man's gotten nowhere close to a 0.05 in his life. So whatever, sweetie.
Yeah, I don't think you're a 5. I also think you have less humility than a Kardashian. Doesn't he mean? I mean, I
really
sort of get
know.
what he's saying, but yeah, even less. Well, yeah, okay, I get what that's supposed to mean, but like, okay, I mean,
Sorry, not sorry. I'm telling you, nothing makes an insecure man without a profile picture madder than a woman with a lot of confidence that he knows he cannot get close to. It is high-key funny to me how much these men hate women who like themselves and have confidence. And I'm just sorry you hate yourself. I hope you get to a place in life where you can have a profile picture and maybe you'll be less hateful if you get there.
All right, Wave of Light commented, racists. Okay, I don't know.
Okay.
Fact check false, but okay.
Mayo Namio said, good production on this video, got right into the topics without chit chat.
So that's because for the audio podcast listeners, they like more of a conversational style, but I think on YouTube, they really want to get into the meat of the video. So we started cutting out some of the chit chat into the video version that goes up on YouTube.
They don't want to hear about our weekend.
Kunal says Brad and Hannah would make such a cute couple, though, in response to the Pearl thing. I can't even wrap my head around it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we make a great podcast couple.
Yeah.
All right, this one's really fine print, so let me squint. I need to wear my glasses.
You're old.
I know. Michael Schwartz said, I like that Brad stays impartial for the most part. Hannah's just another liberal giving her opinion. I am a classical liberal giving my opinion, but I don't think that's what he means. You might want to just talk about topics, leave your views out of it. That would defeat the point of a podcast. That would give you more credibility and possibly more subscriptions. I don't think that's how anything works, my dude.
No, having hotter takes usually gets you more subscriptions. And also, The idea that I stay impartial is just not true.
He just doesn't like my opinion on something. He's like, I can't stand this woman giving her opinion. She needs to pipe down and just smile and go along with whatever I think. This is
I know. I give my opinion just as much.
But you pointed this out. I think female commentators get a lot more of this, where like people don't want you to have a strong opinions. They want you to sit still, be pretty, and just kind of show up and nod along. And it's not that
That's
kind of
not
show.
Hannah. That's not Hannah Cox.
And I will say, I didn't become, and we didn't get in the top 1% of podcasts. I didn't become one of the top commentators for my movement and make the kind of money I make because people hate my opinions.
Also, like, taking subscriber advice from a dude with 1 subscriber. I mean, all right. Sophie says, OMG, Brad is straight. And then the, like, that sus emoji. And I'm like, yeah, no, I just think Pearl doesn't do basic research.
Yeah, which, I mean, we already knew because her theories about pretty much everything are completely off the wall, but it was just high-key funny. There's a flag.
It was pretty funny.
Flag in every single platform you're on, but whatever. Kunal Lobo said, I thought Brad was base until he said that dogs are better than cats. Now I can't even take him seriously. Say what you want about Matt Walsh. At least he has a base stance on dogs. Cats are far superior, and just from this opinion alone, I'm afraid to say Matt Walsh over Brad Polumbo. You know, what I will say is I wasn't aware of Matt's take on this, but the fact that he's a cat man tracks.
Dogs are so clearly better than cats that I just can't even engage with this nonsense opinion.
Yeah, but he's like I just like.
Also, you know what I recently found out? Michael Knowles, who I debated and who I disagree with on many, many things, has a take that I think is so dumb that I can't even I won't even platform it with a debate. He doesn't think aliens are real.
Oh, I don't think aliens are real.
Oh my God, we're gonna have to do a whole podcast on UFOs. They're definitely alien. They're just there's nothing else they could be.
Government spy drones.
No, the government does not have technology that advanced. Or if they did, we would have conquered China by now. Seriously.
Maybe,
All right.
maybe not.
We'll do a whole. We'll do a UFO episode special.
We'll return to this.
All right. Daniel says base politics, not base pop culture. Stick to the politics. How about we talk about whatever we want? And if you don't like it, we want you to watch. But if you don't want to, okay.
Truly don't understand these people who like want to come on and tell commentators. It's the same people who are like, know your audience. No, my audience needs to know me. I'm not sitting here to throw you red meat. I'm not sitting here to give you an echo chamber. If that's what you're looking for, you're not smart enough to be my audience and keep it moving. Like, no. Potato person said, Hannah, agree 100% on some sort of paid service for those Karens. They need a LARP group or something to keep them busy.
Yeah, Karens, that's the one common thing all Karens, left, right, male, female, have in common is like too much free time on their hands to get pressed about things that don't concern them.
Yeah, way too much free time. Way too much. All right, let's move on to our hot takes. Brad, I actually have a food hot take this week, which is usually your domain. I think that red-based pizza sauce is gross. I love pizza, but I never put any of that red sauce on my pizza. Disgusting.
What kind of pizza doesn't have that?
Oh, all kinds. There's a whole world of pizza out there without red sauce. I prefer to have like an oil-based sauce, like oil and like little garlic on it. But you can also do like one of my favorite based pizzas I've ever had was a pimento cheese-based pizza. I used to get in Nashville to die for.
You're just a bougie elitist.
You can do a pesto-based pizza. Wonderful. I just don't like tomatoes or tomato sauce that much. It's just not good. And there's so many other options you can do out there. I say no red pizza sauce ever.
All right. Well, there you go. Okay. My thing is this. People need to stop posting these tweets and these social media posts about their children that say something along the lines of, my kid just came in and asked me how Donald Trump could possibly have done this terrible thing when doesn't he believe in America, or vice versa. My 6-year-old just came in and asked me how Joe Biden could possibly do this, say this thing or whatever. And it's like people post all these things about their children saying the most convenient thing that would never naturally occur to a child. And I think that 99% of them are literally just lies, just fabrications. So that entire genre of social media posting needs to go away.
Also, even if your kid did say it, nobody cares what your kid thinks. Like, I don't understand.
We need to stop taking our political leadership from literal children. That's a hot take. Yeah.
That is a hot take. But
go back to school, Greta.
Both sides need to learn from that. All right, guys, that's a wrap. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Once again, be sure to leave us a comment, leave us a review. We'll read it on air. And until next week, stay based.